office in my living room.
And I am Dr. Xin Tong, coming to you from Bar Harbor, Maine, also known as Vacation Land.
So our job as a technical information scientists, or TIS as we like to say in the business, is to serve the research community by answering all of your mouse-related questions. You might recognize us from our formal webinars on Thursday, or you might have called us late on a Friday evening.
Yeah, but today we want to offer this 15 minutes new format of webinar with you to discuss the hot topics we're getting asked from the phone calls and emails. And now is a great time to talk about these mouse issues that you might not have the time to think about it before, but those things could be very helpful to know when you are using the mice as a models for your experiments.
So hopefully you've gotten your coffee and you've put your feet up because it's time for MiceTech Talk. We've only got 15 minutes, which is just enough time for you to finish your coffee. So today, let's talk new mice tips.
Yep. So the motivation for developing this episode is because we often getting asked about the mouse husbandry, colony maintenance questions, such as the housing conditions, the food and water we are used for the animals, and some of related questions for the new colonies, new mice. So we want to address some of your concerns by today's MiceTech Talk.
So we've planned some fun poll questions for you throughout our show, and we'd love it if you would be able to participate. I'm going to open the first poll question. First, select the appropriate answers and then click the submit button after selecting your answers. So that step is critical because otherwise we won't get to see your answers. So to practice, here's our first poll question. After the restrictions are lifted, which of the following places would you most like to go for a visit? A, Disneyland, B, Las Vegas, C, Acadia National Park, D, a cruise, or E, somewhere else? So I'll give you just a few seconds to answer those questions. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that. Okay.
Wow, I do see a lot of people want to see the nature views by visiting the Acadia National Park. That's good to know.
Wow, I would have picked Disney World, but that's just me.
Okay, let's come into our real poll questions for today's topic. Caitlin, would you be able to pull out the real poll question?
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, the question is, which of the following things would you think the most important to do when you receive your mice? The option A would be to confirm the coat color or confirm the genotype or the health status. And the last option would be all of these things above. We shall wait for a few seconds until all the answers have been in.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that. Let's see here. So it looks like the majority of you guys said all of the above, which is great because that is true. All of those are very important to do. So we've prepared a few discussion topics to talk about today, but you can also ask content-related questions during the show using the live Q&A function listed on the right hand of the screen, and we'll try to answer some of those questions live. So today we're going to be talking about getting ready for new mice. And sometimes these things get overlooked or forgotten about. So Xingtong and I are really excited to discuss some of these things with you. So let us first talk about something that we get questions about frequently, which is coat color.
Yes, so please be aware that as you answered from the poll questions, majority of you has realized the coat color is really important, and this is right. Sometimes it can indicate that your mice may experience the genetic shifts, and sometimes if you you should check the coat color to make sure it is consistent with its genetic background, such as Black 6J. They should have a black coat color, and if you do find those animals to be agouti or white coat color, which could mean some of the maybe cage card being mixed up or some of the incidents occurred. But on the other hand, if you observe the coat color segregation, sometimes it may not mean the genotype has been changed for these animals. For some of the strains, which is on the mixed genetic background, it might be common to observe the progenies have a very different coat colors, but they do share the same phenotype. And for the coat color, this also brings another important thing that you should do when you receive your animals, which is to genotype all the animals you receive, even though it is homozygous. So this can help in multiple ways. Firstly, you can confirm that you are receiving the right genotype of the animals, and then you can also confirm that your genotyping protocol is working in your lab by your hand. So I do have a very sad examples that I have some researchers call me that their mutant mice has lost the phenotype. And for this type of investigation, I do check their genotyping protocols and their breeding schemes. And it turns out very sadly, they received heterozygous animals, and they do not genotype the animals before they set up the breeding. So after several rounds of breeding process, I mean, it's very likely they already lost the mutant alleles, and it is unlikely we can help in this situation unless doing another round of cryo recovery, which takes a lot of time. So please be aware of the coat color as well as genotyping the animals when they arrived. And after you're checking the genotyping of the animals, you should also paying attention to the water and diet you should be used for the strain. Hey, Caitlin, I know you are a sort of our resident mouth feeding expert. Do you have any comments on the food and water for these animals?
Sure. So mouse food intake is one of my favorite things. But first, let me talk about water. So it's really critical that as soon as your mice arrive, that you go ahead and give them a water bottle. They have gel cups in the packing containers, but they're going to need water bottles right away. And it's also important to use acidified water if you've got an immuno suppressed mouse model. So this could help with Pseudomonas species infection. But to get on to the food intake, we use the Lab Diet 5K52 formulation, which contains about a 6% fat. And so if you're able to, it would be really great to maintain them on this diet in your facility. This will take away from adding additional time for the mice to get used to the change in food. So if you change the food, it's going to take them longer to become used to it, and you're going to have to wait a little bit longer to do your experiments. However, in some cases, it is appropriate to make changes to the diet. For example, if you're having some breeding performance issues, you might decide to increase or decrease the fat content in your diet, depending on how your mice are breeding. We also get some researchers that are really eager to begin their experiments as soon as the mice arrive to their facility. So Xingtong, do you want to comment on why that might not be the best idea?
Yes, definitely it is very important to give the newly imported mice at least 1 week or longer to acclimate to the new environment before you start your experiment. I would like to use the DB mice as an example, which is a typical model for type 2 diabetes. So we did some comprehensive studies on the shipping stresses for those animals, and we do realize that after suffering from the shipping stress, those animals can lose up to 15% of its body weight, as well as you may observe abnormal like low blood glucose levels, and glucose tolerance tested results would be observed too. And this can be applied to many of the strains. So you want to make sure this to give those animals 1 week or even longer time to acclimate. Yeah, do you have anything else to add on for the acclimation?
Yeah, so there's another example that comes to mind that I've actually had some questions about recently, and that's the uncoupling protein 1 knockout mouse model. And this example also demonstrates why it's really important to just be prepared in general for your mice arriving at your facility. So these UCP1 knockout mice are very sensitive to cold temperatures, and they exhibit altered metabolism and are resistant to diet-induced obesity when maintained at 20 degrees. And you actually need to maintain these mice somewhere between 25 and 28 degrees for them to be considered healthy. And so when these mice ship, unfortunately, we can't maintain them at that temperature. So when getting to your facility, it's important to maintain them at 25 to 28 degrees and to really give them that time to recover from that stress. So the final thing I wanted to touch on is setting up your new mice to breed. So what sort of tips do you have for breeding?
For breeding tips, so I would definitely recommend that you may check for the efficient colony management on-demand webinar from Jack's website. But just brief covering this topic, we do recommend that for majority of the strains, you should set up your breeder pairs early, so such as during the weaning time, because these mice may need some time to get acclimated to each other. And you may set up the breeding schemes using pairs or trials. Each different ways may have its advantages. Keep close track of all the breeding performances of the animals and retire the old breeders in a timely manner. Except for that, I also want to touch on some general tips for the poor breeders. For the poor breeders, when you know if it's a challenging breeders, you may want to give them a quiet place to ensure the adequate darkness, and you may want to minimize handling using the clean forceps or gloves to avoid bringing any smells or odors from other animals. Add some enrichment. The nestles or shelter type of enrichment would be useful to relieve the stresses for the animals. And leaving the mating pairs together during all the breeding time is another tips we found could be practical and useful. And the most important thing is to keep track of the breeding performances over time and just getting rid of those non-productive breeders in a timely manner.
Great, yeah, and I know we're going to talk more in depth about breeding tips next week, but this is sort of a great introduction for that, I think. So we have a few minutes left for some questions and answers from the audience. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and submit them through the Q&A on the right-hand side of your screen. But I do see one that I want to go ahead and touch on right away because I think this is, one, a really important question, and two, one that we get a lot. So someone asked, how many mice should I order?
Oh, this is a really good question. So sometimes we do see investigators would be order one breeder pairs, and this is something we would not recommend. And this is because, I mean, for biological reasons, the only male or female you order could be non-productive or could be due to the healthy issues. Even though for very good breeders such as Black 6J, we still have very low chance to find the males or females to be non-productive. So we normally recommend you to starting with 2 to 4 breeder pairs so that you can avoid like wasting the time to do another round of or several rounds of breeding.
Right, and I should also point out too that we cannot guarantee breeding of our mice because we don't have any control in what goes on in other facilities, and so that's why we can't guarantee that. It's also really sad when we get somebody that's emailed us saying that they've been trying to breed this one breeder pair for months and they've had no success, and had they just ordered 2 breeder pairs, they may not have been in that situation. Okay, let's see what else we have. So what types of enrichment do we use or recommend?
So this is also a good question. So we did some testing. I mean, for husbandry studies, we do testing the different enrichment and their effects. And we did find that the use of shelter type of enrichment, such as tunnels and domes, would actually decreases the hair loss rate of Black 6J females, which is a phenotypes for this strain. And meanwhile, the use of nestle enrichment, such as alpha twist and maybe other types, would actually increase the pop survive and the average numbers of litter per female. Yeah, you may want to add enrichment to those animals, and you do find they may be very challenging for breeding, or they may have some maybe aggressive behaviors, such as the SJL strain. And for those enrichment, would be able to improve its breeding performances.
Yeah, I've got another follow-up question from our how many mice should I order question that just came in. We have a viewer that wants to know if it makes sense to order trios instead of pairs.
So I do remember we have studied the cage densities on the breeding performances, and what we do find is that actually the cage densities, which means if you're using pairs or trios, the average pops number per female would be similar. But as you should know, but if you order the trios, which means from one cage you have 2 females, and in total you would get more pops when you are using only one breeder pair. So we also did some follow-up studies on how is the cage density affecting on the breeding performances. I think all in all, as I remember right now, we do not see major differences between the trials versus pairs breeding schemes. But so I would close like this. If you want to have more animals in just one round of breeding, and if it's allowed in your facility, you may consider to use trials. And another phenomenon we found for the trial breeding is that the females of the first who give birth to the first litters would also sometimes take care of the litters from the second female. That's called the aunting phenomenon, and it could help. I mean, at least increase the median body weight of the pups. That's as far as I remember.
Yeah, great. And let's see if there's any other questions. We have a question about acidified water for our mice. Do we use acidified water for all of our strains? And is it a problem to put them on normal water after arrival? Do you want to comment on that?
So when I pursue my PhD, I do use checked mice, and we do put the mice on the normal water. So based on my own experience, I do not find the mice have healthy issues. I mean, that could be depending on different institution or facility, depending on the environmental factors. I mean, yeah, that's all I know. So do you have any comments for this as well?
I would just say that you should really try to use the acidified water if you have the immunodeficient strains. But like my experience too in graduate school, we didn't use acidified water for any of our mice, and the majority of them came from jacks, and we never had any issues either.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if there's any last questions. Oh, we are actually a little over time, so why don't we go ahead and wrap this up? So that's all we have time for. Tune in again to MiceTech Talk next week for Let's Talk Breeding. This is Dr. Caitlin saying we miss you, and we're looking forward to seeing you next week. So stay healthy, stay safe, and stay excited about research.
Yes. Goodbye, everyone.